Before you go any further, pause for a moment. Just stop for a second and settle yourself. You are about to read something that is not just ordinary text. It may feel like it is speaking directly to you, even if that sounds strange at first. What you are about to receive carries a certain weight. It is the kind of message that feels like it shows up at a specific moment in your life for a reason. Maybe you are meant to slow down long enough to actually take it in. Maybe something inside you is already open to it without you realizing. There is someone out there who has been thinking about you, not in a passing way, not once in a while, but in a steady and deep way that they cannot fully explain to anyone else. Your name has been sitting in their thoughts longer than they would ever admit out loud. They have carried memories of you quietly, without telling anyone. Something in their life is shifting now. Something internal has changed. It is subtle, but real. And because of that shift, they are starting to move in your direction again, even if they do not fully understand how or why. Take a moment with that idea before you move forward. This is not just random words placed in front of you. It is the kind of thing that connects to emotions you may have already been feeling in small ways. Somewhere in your past or present, there is a person who went quiet. Maybe they stepped back from you. Maybe they acted like they were done. Maybe they behaved like what you had was not important anymore, like it was something they could leave behind easily. But that was not the full truth. Something inside them has been changing slowly over time. They are beginning to realize things they avoided before. They are starting to feel the weight of what was left unresolved between you, and now they are coming back into that awareness. Not for small talk, not for casual check-ins, but because there are things they never said that are becoming too heavy to keep inside. And when they finally speak, it may surprise you more than you expect. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is honest in a way they were not able to be before. There are certain connections between people that do not behave in a simple way. They do not always follow logic. They do not always end cleanly in the mind, even when life moves forward on the outside. Time does not always erase them. Distance does not always weaken them. Silence does not always end them. Sometimes it just pushes everything deeper underneath the surface. You may have already felt small signs of this without fully understanding them. Random thoughts about this person appearing without reason. Moments where something reminds you of them without warning. A sudden emotion that does not seem connected to anything happening in your present life. These things can feel random, but often they are tied to emotional memory that has not fully settled. When two people have been deeply connected, even silence does not always remove that inner awareness. The other person tried to move on in their own way. They tried to distract themselves. They tried to convince themselves that what they felt was not that deep or that important. They told themselves they were fine without it. For a while, that illusion almost worked. During busy days, they could ignore it. In conversations, in work, in routine life, they could push it away. But when everything became quiet, especially at night, the thoughts came back. In those moments, there was no distraction strong enough to keep you out of their mind. And slowly, that repetition created pressure inside them. Thoughts they did not want started to return again and again. Memories they tried to bury kept resurfacing. They started questioning themselves. Why are you still in my mind? Why does this not fully go away? Why does nothing else feel the same in the same way? That kind of internal questioning becomes uncomfortable over time, because the answers are not easy to accept. It starts to point toward a truth they were not ready to face, that you mattered more than they admitted, that what they had with you was not as simple as they tried to believe. And that realization creates conflict inside a person, because it also brings responsibility. It brings guilt. It brings awareness of how they showed up or how they did not show up. They may start remembering specific moments between you, conversations that now feel different in hindsight, choices they made that they now see more clearly. They begin to understand that the distance did not happen randomly. It was shaped by their own actions, their own hesitation, their own fear of handling things properly. And that understanding is not light. It sits heavily in the mind. It does not go away easily. You might wonder why they stayed silent for so long if they felt all of this. From the outside, silence can look like indifference. But internally, it is often something very different. A big part of it is fear. Fear of being rejected. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of facing the emotional truth directly. Fear of discovering that too much time has passed. It can feel safer for a person to say nothing than to risk hearing something they are not ready for. So they wait. They delay. They avoid. But avoidance does not remove emotion. It only delays the moment it has to be faced. Over time, silence itself becomes a burden. What once felt like protection slowly turns into pressure. What once felt like distance becomes emotional weight. Eventually, something inside them begins to break through that silence. It does not have to be a big event. It can be something small that triggers reflection. Maybe they see something that reminds them of you. Maybe they hear your name. Maybe they reach a moment in their life where everything feels still and honest. In that moment, they can no longer ignore what they have been carrying. And that is when the decision forms inside them. Not as a sudden, dramatic impulse, but as a quiet realization that they cannot keep holding it in. They decide they need to speak. When that moment comes, it will not feel casual to them. It will not feel like small conversation. It will feel like stepping into something they avoided for a long time. They are not coming to pretend nothing happened. They are not coming just to reconnect lightly. They are coming because they need to express what was never expressed properly before. The feelings they buried, the regrets they avoided, the understanding they only reached after time and distance created clarity. From your perspective, you may have believed they moved on easily. You may have thought they were unaffected. You may have assumed you were more emotionally involved than they ever were. But the reality is often more complicated than that. People can feel deeply and still fail to express it. People can care and still act in confusing or inconsistent ways. They may have carried emotions they never showed. They may have struggled in silence while appearing distant on the outside. And when that truth finally comes out, it can change the way you see everything that happened between you. Because what is being revealed is not just about the present moment, it is about everything that was never said before this point. This is not just a simple interaction, it is a turning point shaped by everything that led up to it. All the silence, all the distance, all the reflection that happened separately on both sides. They did not arrive at this moment quickly. It took time for them to face themselves honestly. It took time for them to question their own behavior without excuses. At first, they may have avoided responsibility. They may have tried to justify their actions. They may have told themselves that things simply did not work out. But over time, that explanation may have stopped feeling true. Because memory has a way of becoming clearer when it is not being defended against. When a person is alone with their thoughts, they cannot keep rewriting everything in a way that avoids discomfort. Eventually, truth becomes harder to ignore. They begin to see their own role more clearly. Not in a self-punishing way, but in a realistic way that they could not accept before. And that realization changes them. It does not make everything perfect. It does not fix the past. But it changes how they see you and how they see what happened. They may have tried to replace the connection. They may have tried to move forward with new experiences or new people. They may have tried to convince themselves that it was not as significant as it felt. But comparisons have a way of exposing truth. When everything new feels slightly different in a way that does not fully satisfy them, the mind starts to revisit what once felt real and complete. That does not always mean replacement is impossible. It just means something in the original connection left a strong impression that was not easily erased. And now, with time and distance, clarity has formed. Not certainty about outcomes, but clarity about feelings and responsibility. They do not know how you will respond. They do not know if there is space left for what they want to say. They do not know if too much time has passed. But they do know that staying silent has become heavier than speaking. That not expressing it has become harder than risking rejection. So they choose honesty over silence. Even if it feels uncertain, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if the outcome is unknown. And this is where your awareness becomes important too. Because it is easy to turn a moment like this into hope without reflection. It is easy to assume that their return automatically means everything can go back to how it was, or that it proves the connection in a certain way. But real understanding requires more than hope. It requires listening carefully to what is actually being said, not just emotionally reacting to what you want it to mean. You need to notice not only their words, but their clarity, their accountability, and whether their actions match their realization. Because not every moment of return is meant to rebuild something. Sometimes it is meant to bring closure. Sometimes it is meant to bring truth. And sometimes it is meant to bring understanding before moving forward separately. Staying grounded in what is real, rather than what is desired, is what protects you from repeating old emotional patterns. What happens next depends on what is actually present between you now, not only what once existed before. And whatever comes, the most important part is that you are able to see it clearly, without rushing, without distortion, and without losing yourself in what you hope it might become. To observe not only what they say, but how they show up, how they behave when emotions are high, and whether their actions stay consistent once the intensity of the moment passes. Because words alone can feel powerful in the moment. Words can sound honest. Words can even feel healing when you have been waiting a long time to hear them. But words are not the full truth. Words are only the surface. Anyone can express regret when they feel emotional. Anyone can explain the past in a better way once they have had time to reflect. Anyone can say they understand now. That part is easy to say. The real question is what happens after the words are spoken. Do they change how they behave once the conversation ends? Do they stay consistent when things are no longer emotional or intense? Do they continue showing effort when there is no pressure in the moment? Do they take responsibility without trying to soften it or shift it away from themselves? That is where the truth becomes visible. Because real understanding is not proven in a single conversation. It is proven over time. It is proven in actions that repeat. It is proven in behavior that stays steady even when things are not convenient or emotionally charged. And in this situation, you are not the same person you were before. You are not standing in the same emotional place where things once broke down. You have already lived through the silence. You have already sat with the confusion. You have already gone through the part where you did not get answers. You had to process everything without clarity from them. You had to make sense of endings that were not explained properly. You had to carry emotions that were not fully acknowledged. And in doing that, something in you changed. It made you more aware. It made you more observant. It made you more honest with yourself about what you need from someone and what you cannot keep accepting anymore. That kind of growth does not happen instantly. It comes from experience, especially difficult experience. So when this moment arrives, you are not walking into it as someone searching for answers. You are walking into it as someone who has already learned through experience. You are not trying to figure out what happened anymore. You are now trying to understand what is real right now. You know what it felt like when they were present. You know what it felt like when they were distant. You know what it felt like when things were unclear. And you also know what it took for you to rebuild yourself after that gap was created. That does not disappear just because they are back in front of you. That remains part of your awareness. It becomes part of how you see the situation now. This is why this moment is not only about them, it is equally about you. Because while they are coming with something to say, you are standing there with something to evaluate. Not in a defensive way, not in a closed way, but in a clear and grounded way. You are there to see if what they are offering now aligns with the person you have become through everything you experienced. That is not about control over them. It is about clarity within yourself. There is a different kind of strength in that position. It is not loud strength. It is not emotional reaction. It is steady awareness. The ability to stay present while still seeing things clearly. The ability to listen without immediately being pulled back into old patterns. The ability to feel something without losing your sense of direction inside it. That is not something everyone has access to in emotional moments, but you have already been shaped by experience that brought you closer to it. There may be a moment when you are sitting or standing in front of them where everything feels still. Not because nothing is happening, but because something internal in you pauses before reaction. In that moment, before you respond, before you analyze, before you try to decide what it means, there will be a simple awareness. Something in you will recognize the reality of the situation as it is, not as it was, and not as you once imagined it. That recognition is important. It is quieter than thoughts. It is not influenced by fear or hope in the same way. It is simply awareness of what is in front of you. And trusting that awareness matters more than forcing yourself into immediate interpretation. Because your mind will want to analyze everything. It will want to predict outcomes. It will want to fill in gaps. But that first moment of clarity is often the most honest. What you do next does not need to be rushed. There is no requirement for instant answers. There is no rule that says you must decide everything in one conversation. You are allowed to listen fully without committing to a direction immediately. You are allowed to ask questions without needing closure in the same moment. You are allowed to pause internally and still remain present. You might express how things felt for you during the time apart. You might ask them to explain what changed. You might set boundaries around what you are willing to revisit. You might also realize that even if feelings still exist, the shape of your emotional world is not the same anymore. All of those responses are valid. Because this moment is not about returning to something old by default. It is about understanding whether anything real can exist in the present version of both of you, and that understanding cannot be rushed. It cannot be forced into a single emotional exchange. It needs space to be real. What matters most is that whatever happens is grounded in truth. Not assumption, not pressure, not nostalgia, but truth about what actually exists between you now. Because truth has a different feeling than hope. Hope often pulls you forward emotionally before clarity is fully formed. Truth feels steadier. Even when it is uncomfortable, it feels more stable over time. And when truth is allowed to be fully seen, it brings clarity. Even if the outcome is not what you expected. Even if the situation does not resolve the way you once imagined. If there is still something between you that can grow, it will show itself through actions, not just words. It will show itself through consistency, through effort that does not disappear after the emotional moment passes, through responsibility that does not shift when things become inconvenient. And if there is not, that will also become clear in time. Not through one sentence, but through patterns, through behavior that does not match intention, through inconsistency that repeats. Either way, something important becomes resolved. Something that was once unclear, unfinished, or emotionally open begins to settle into understanding. And that is not a small thing. Because unresolved emotional connections do not stay quiet in the background of life. They often shape how you think, how you trust, how you connect with new people, and how safe you feel opening up again. When something like this becomes clear, it removes that hidden weight. It does not erase memory, but it changes how memory affects you. It turns confusion into understanding. It allows you to see what actually happened, not just how it felt in fragments. It allows you to recognize what was mutual, what was missing, and what was never fully aligned. And that kind of clarity matters whether the connection continues or not. Because one of the hardest parts after a connection like this ends is not knowing how much of it was real on both sides, not knowing if you cared more, not knowing if you misunderstood the depth, not knowing if you were the only one holding on to something meaningful. But when someone stands in front of you and chooses honesty, even if imperfect, even if uncomfortable, it confirms something important. It confirms that it was real in some form, that it had emotional weight for them too, even if it was not expressed properly at the time. That does not automatically mean reconciliation, but it does mean your experience was not one-sided imagination. It had substance. It had emotional presence. It mattered in ways that were not fully spoken before. And that realization can bring a quiet form of peace, even if the direction forward is not clear yet. It confirms that what you felt was not a mistake. It confirms that your emotional investment was not based on nothing. It confirms that you were engaging with something that had depth, even if it was handled imperfectly. And that leads to an important understanding about yourself as well. Because after experiences like this, it is common for people to question how much they gave, how open they were, how deeply they felt. Sometimes the mind tries to reframe that as a mistake, as something that should have been controlled more, as something that should have been held back. But that interpretation is not accurate. Your capacity to feel deeply is not the problem. Your ability to care fully is not the flaw. The real difficulty comes from imbalance, from situations where two people are not in the same place emotionally, where one person is more aware of the connection than the other at that time, where one person is ready for depth while the other is still uncertain about what they feel. That difference creates tension. It creates confusion. It creates situations where one person is building something real internally while the other is still learning how to engage with it properly. That is not a failure of your emotional depth. It is a mismatch in timing and readiness. And when you look back, what you offered was not something to regret. It was an honest reflection of who you are when you are connected to someone. It showed your ability to be present, to invest, to care without holding back. That is not something to reduce. It is something to understand more clearly. Because the goal is not to become less open. The goal is to become more aware of where that openness is placed, to recognize where it is received and where it is not, to understand where it is matched and where it is not. That is where emotional wisdom develops, not by shutting down what you feel, but by learning how to direct it in environments where it can be respected and returned. So when you see what you gave in this connection, do not treat it as something that was too much. Treat it as something that revealed your capacity for real emotional connection. It showed you what depth actually feels like when you are fully present with someone. It showed you the difference between surface-level interaction and something that carries meaning and emotional weight. And that becomes a reference point for you moving forward. Not to compare every connection in a rigid way, but to recognize what real presence feels like when it is mutual, stable, and consistent. Because once you have experienced that depth, even in an imperfect form, you become more aware of what alignment feels like and what misalignment feels like. And that awareness is what protects you going forward, not by closing you off, but by helping you see more clearly when something is real, when something is unclear, and when something is not fully aligned. That is where true clarity begins.